Good evening. Welcome to the Township Board meeting of August 9th. And Mr. Guzak, can you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
With that, I'll ask for an approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Support. And the consent agenda. Hopefully you'll allow that for both.
Support.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? With that, we're going to move to privilege presentation, and the board will present a resolution celebrating the 100th birthday of Grand Blanc Township resident Louise Hubler. And here this evening is her son, or one of her sons, and I'd like to present this to Mr. Hubler.
Great guy. Wow, that's pretty cool.
Maybe we're going to talk to your mom about possibly presenting it to her, but we weren't sure that she will be willing to do that right now, right?
Yeah,
Let me turn this microphone
she
so Paul.
kind of stays in her room.
Okay. Well, we have this resolution, and it states, whereas Mrs. Louise Hubler will be honored by friends and relatives on the occasion of her 100th birthday, and she was born in Clare County, August 15th, 1918. She received her primary and secondary education in Coleman School System here in Michigan. She developed her passion for service and education, participating in her school student government and playing on the basketball and tennis teams. And whereas she graduated valedictorian of Coleman High School and entered into the Flint Junior College, she later transferred to Central Teachers College, now Central Michigan University. Upon her graduation, she taught in the Groveland area and Sharp Road School. And whereas she met her husband Dewey Hubler and was married on February 13th, 1943, they later moved to Grand Blanc and bought a farmhouse on Embury Road. And whereas Dewey and Louise have 3 sons, Dick, Art, and Roy, her sons helped on the farm, taking care of livestock, selling produce, and canning, I guess. Louise was the glue to her family, attending her sons' 4-H and swimming competitions and becoming den mother of their Cub Scout troops, all while achieving her master's degree in special education. She later went on to teach at Grand Blanc High School and was very involved in her services at the Grand Blanc Methodist Church, where she taught Sunday school and was active in Circle. And whereas she has lived during the most eventful century of this world's history, and in her quiet way, has been a force for good and stabilizing influence on those around her during these turbulent years. Now, therefore, it is deemed an honor and privilege to extend this certificate of recognition on August 9th, 2018 to Miss Louise Hubler on the occasion of her 100th birthday, and sincere congratulations and best wishes for many more happy, productive years. So, Mr. Hubler, please pass on our wishes to your mother, and we appreciate you being here.
And I appreciate all. On her behalf, thank you very much. Appreciate all the time and effort that goes into this. I know you have a lot of other things to do besides this too, but thank you very much. Appreciate it.
One thing that Mr. Hubler, I spent a few minutes with him this afternoon, and one of the things that he mentioned is that they're trying to get 100 birthday cards for his mother. Her birthday is actually this Wednesday, the 15th, which is next Wednesday.
Right.
And so they're trying to get 100 birthday cards for her, and I think you're in the 30s right now, right?
High 30s.
So we're gonna post some things on Facebook and some social media sites and see what we can do.
She doesn't know we're doing that.
Okay, well, is she on Facebook?
No,
Okay.
I'm on Facebook, but I looked up something else, and I don't even know how to get back on.
Okay, well, as long as she isn't on Facebook or social media.
She doesn't have a computer, doesn't want one.
Okay. Okay, well, please pass along our wishes to her, okay?
And thank you again very much on her behalf. The family appreciates it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hubler. We have a few more presentations. And the board will present a resolution commending and thanking Susan DeVerney, Terry Donnelly, and Doreen Woodbury for their dedication, commitment, and service to Grand Blanc Township for their many, many years of service. And Ms. Lane probably can give a little bit more background than what I can, but would you like to help me with these certificates, Ms. Lane? So the first one we have here is for Ms. DeVerney.
Okay.
So come on up, Ms. DeVerney, and we'll read it. Certificate of Appreciation presented to Susan DeVerney in recognition of your contribution to our community. On behalf of the residents of the Charter Township of Grand Blanc, we offer our sincere thanks to you for helping make our township a better place for over 7 years. So thank you very much, Sue. We really appreciate it.
I'm asking for.
Okay. Who do we have next here? Who's the next one? Next one is we have Doreen. And again, a certificate of appreciation presented to Doreen Woodbury in recognition of your contribution to our community on behalf of the residents of the Charter Township of Grand Blanc. We offer our sincere thanks to you for helping to make our township a better place for over 31 years. So thank you very much, Doreen. We appreciate your help and guidance over the years very much. Thank you. And one additional certificate of appreciation to Ms. Terry Donnelly in recognition of your contribution to our community on behalf of the residents of the Charter Township of Grand Blanc. We offer our sincere thanks to you for helping make our township a better place for over 7 years as well. So thank you also very much, Ms. Donnelly. Thank you, Ms. Lang. And it's our dedicated people like this that make our elections work like we had yesterday.
We are losing almost 75 years between these three women for all of their years of service at the county level and here. I'm losing best friends.
Wow. Well, thank you for your service.
Oh, wait a minute. Can you girls come back for a second? I just want to get a picture of
I
all
think
three
Paul
of you.
is getting pictures up there.
Oh, okay, good. Can I go up there and take a shot?
Yeah, sure. Let's just go and pause the meeting before you go.
Sorry.
That's okay. Hey. It's all good. Hey, you don't have to apologize, Scott and Dennis do. Oh, did I say that out loud?
Hi, I'm Ken, and I'm here to give an apology.
You guys finally got that? A little slow, Bob.
We'll just take a couple of minute break here while we get a picture.
Get a pretty picture of yourself.
Okay, we'll resume our meeting now. With that, we have one more privileged presentation, and we'd like to welcome to the podium Supervisor for Rose Pest Solutions, Mr. Mark Lucero. Good evening, Mr. Lucero.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are you doing today?
We're doing
Good.
fine.
I'll keep it short and sweet. So you guys got a pretty big agenda in front of you here today. I just like to come in, usually around halfway through, and give a quick update on how the season's been going. Halfway with the election,
Sure.
give you a little leeway. My wife's a clerk in Bay City, so I get the headaches.
Okay.
The program started on April 16th, just like it normally does. Unfortunately, this year was a little bit different than years past. I don't know if you remember the ice storm that we got the weekend before opening day. So the larvicide was a little bit slower getting out than normal, just due to we were battling ice in a lot of places. Other than that, it seemed like it was maybe 2-3 weeks down the road, it was like a light switch went off and all of a sudden it's 80 degrees outside. And that went from April all the way into May, which brought out a lot of spring mosquitoes early on in the season. Had a pretty good uptick in phone calls around that time. I know I spoke to a couple of you guys. Right before the Memorial holiday, that led into.
That's not on.
There we go. Hear me now? Right before the start of the holiday, that led into quite a few nuisance calls. which led us to fogging actual Area 3 just due to calls. The traps were low, but the calls came in mainly from that area, so we ended up fogging that area at that time. After the initial rush of calls, once the weather started working for us, we got the barrier backpacks out there, we got the fogging backpacks out there, started hitting spots. You could literally see the calls dip right down. So that was kind of nice there. The calls throughout the entire season have been pretty average compared to maybe like the last 5 years or so. Trap counts have all been low. The West Nile testing has all been negative so far as to date. As of today, everything's running as planned. We got no problems, no setbacks to speak of. And I got a few stats for you guys as of where we're sitting right now. We've got a little over 1,200 man hours in the township. Used 1,137 pounds of larvicide so far. 6,159 briquettes, that's the 5-month bricks that last all summer that go in the catch basins and the big water lots. Demand, which is our barrier backpacks, which would be the stuff we do per property if they request it. We've used 213 gallons, which doesn't kind of sound like a lot, but we use about 1/4 to 1/2 gallon for an average yard. So that's quite a few. Control, which is our nighttime or backpack adulticide, we've only used 27 gallons of that. Calls to date so far, 573, and currently I have 6 open, which will probably be handled by tomorrow.
Mark, how do those compare to last year's numbers, in terms of the amount of product that we're using and man hours? And
Usually the product, the larvicide, usually sticks pretty consistent because the majority of the larvicide comes in the spring because we're hammering everything. I mean, we've been here so long, we pretty much know where every puddle's gonna happen.
Right.
You know what I mean, which is great. So we get a good jump on it, so that's the majority of it. I can get you numbers compared to
I'm
the
just
last
curious.
5 years. Right now, it's pretty average, unless, the only reason you'd see a big fluctuation is if we had a really rainy year.
Right. I think
Because,
last year we did, right?
yeah, because some of the stuff we know that lasts all summer long, we put those bricks in it, so that we don't have to worry about it no more. It's the stuff that comes and goes, comes and goes, comes and goes, so that's when you see the big fluctuations in the larvicide.
Hey, Mr. Thomas?
Through you, Mr. Supervisor, I am just absolutely blown away by your customer service.
Thank you.
I've never, ever had a company deal with residents, upset residents, with compliment, phone calls, emails, through social media to me
Thank you.
personally.
Thank you.
I can't sing your praises enough.
I appreciate
Awesome
it. We
job.
definitely appreciate it. And I gotta say, the program wouldn't work as well as it does. I'm sure you heard this earlier this afternoon. The residents out here are what make this program. I mean, Grand Blanc is probably our most successful program of anybody we do, just due to the resident involvement. Again, we know where a lot of the water spots are. That's on our maps. That's everything. That's good. That's great. It's when stuff like this happens. Obviously, we didn't get a lot of rain. It come and go. But if that lasts for a couple days, our phones will blow up. And that's what we want. That's the education getting out there. That's people understanding how the program works. We want you to call. We don't want you to feel like it's a burden. We don't want you to feel like you're bothering us. If we can get the water, we don't have the calls down the road. I would rather come out for your house for water than because you're getting eaten alive in your backyard. So I really commend the residents out here.
Yeah, I think, it's a continual education process
Oh,
of
it
how it
is.
works,
It
because, new residents, obviously, I see
Right.
signs up that, they're having some service.
Right.
Which provide mosquito spraying. It's like,
Which is crazy that we still see
Yeah.
that. And I mean, if our techs see it, they won't obviously go and
Right.
undercut the other company, but they'll let the resident know after the company's left that, look, you're already paying for this, you already get
Right.
this service.
yeah.
Because as long as we've been doing it, it's crazy to see how many people still buy it.
Well, and the other thing is that, the perception is that the fogging truck actually is what,
Right.
is the whole program.
Right.
Hey, that truck hasn't been in my
Right.
neighborhood yet.
Right, and that's probably 10% of it. Because what you don't see is, when everybody hears about a mosquito program, the biggest pitch is they show the truck. Because
Right.
it's the loudest, it's the most flamboyant, I mean, you can see it, it's out there, it's blowing smoke, it's doing everything it needs to do. What you don't see is, and we've changed in the past few years, you've probably seen our outfits, the guys wear big neon, because when you go in the woods, it looks a little suspicious when you're walking through somebody's woods like we're trying to hide. So we went to the neon so you can really see us. We want to be seen. And that's what people don't see. They don't see us out in the woods. They don't see us larvicide, and they don't see us putting in the time during the day is what they don't see. So that's the big part. So, anything else?
Anybody else have anything?
All right, guys. Have a good evening, and thanks for making some time for me.
I think the,
Thank you, Mark.
I think the biggest vote of confidence was our millage for mosquito.
Yes, those numbers were
Absolutely.
crazy. That was
Evidently,
pretty
the
good.
residents appreciate what
Yeah.
we're doing.
Yeah, we're happy to see. That's crazy. That's a good
Yeah.
number. 72% is a pretty good
Right.
win. Great work.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Mark.
Okay. With that, we will open the floor for citizen comments. And we'll start over here on the left side of the room. Okay? And we'll go to the back of the room. Mr. Erk, good evening.
Good evening. Eder, 7212 Porter Road. Got a chance to read this little article in the View. A little bit of rhetoric. I want to call it hoopla. I could think of some other names for it. But anyhow, I could give you many reasons for what I'm about to ask you to do, okay? A lot of damage has been done over the last year or two. And there's no way back. There's no way back. I don't care if the city council would pay for 100% of the fire department. I don't want them as a partner. Too much rhetoric, too much work. We spend a lot of time at this. It's taken a toll on all of us. I can't speak for you, but I'm sure it has. This just goes on and on and on. It's never going to end. Never going to end. So, put an end to it, eh? Dissolve this partnership. With the council, with the mayor. We'll still be friends and neighbors with the city residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Erk. Okay, seeing no other citizen comments, we'll move on to the approval of the minutes. Is there a motion to approve them either individually or as a group?
I'll make the motion to approve them as a group.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We've already approved the consent agenda items. So moving to the operational issues. The board will consider a resolution setting a date for the Truth and Taxation public hearing on September 13th, 2018 for the proposed authorized 2018 millage levy of 6.8250 mils, comprised of 4.5143 mils for township operating millage, of which 0.7 mils is dedicated to police building bonds, 0.9026 mils for extra voted police department operating millage, 0.1610 mils for extra voted mosquito control, 1 mil for extra voted fire department operating millage, and 0.2471 mils for extra voted parks and recreation capital improvement. The notice for this must be published 6 days in advance of the public hearing.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, there's been a motion.
Second.
It's been seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor?
It's a roll call, sir.
Okay. Go ahead,
Mr.
Ms. Lane.
Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Atkins?
Yes.
Mr. Guzak?
Yes.
Myself, yes. Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Thank you.
Item B, under operational issues, the board will consider the resubmission of bids for Park Recreation Pavilion floor replacement and field project.
Mr. Supervisor, to this board, I still personally, I totally support Parks and Rec, and I would hope that you would reconsider and go with the original bid for all of the cement work and field improvements.
Is that a motion?
I'm willing.
Pardon?
Are you making that a
Well,
motion?
I didn't hear it as a motion. We've got a motion here that, I don't know. Are you wanting to put that forward as a motion or what?
I'm willing to put it forward. We go with the original low bidder for the total project.
I'm not in favor of going that route, but if that's a motion, I don't know, is there a second to it, or will it die without a second? I don't hear a second to that motion. So, the motion as presented, does anybody want to make that motion?
I'll make the motion.
Okay?
I'll second it.
Okay.
For
or doing it as we discussed yesterday, and we had a consensus yesterday.
And
amongst
this
the
would be
board.
under the Kennedy,
Yes,
the Kennedy excavation at 100, and I'm trying to find the.
164
Yeah.
or something.
it's not printed in
It's
here.
not printed, I'm trying to find it right now, folks, that's why I'm looking.
It's at 164,566.86.
Thank you, Attorney Laddie.
So that's the motion that we're going with. Okay, so there's been a motion, been seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. Okay, moving on to what we are hearing from the community and future agenda items. I know that there, you know, we had a little bit of a lengthy discussion last night on the fire, and we're going to be moving forward on our study. And I understand there was an article in the paper today. I'm sure it warrants a response, but Mr. Laddie or Mr. Lehman, anything that you have for the good of the board this evening, or
I do not.
Mr. Thomas? Yeah, go ahead. We'll stay with what we're hearing in the community then.
Oh, that was.
Oh.
Mr. Atkins.
Oh, Mr. Atkins, I'm sorry.
I just had a question about the joint fire agreement. At this point, since the millage passed, we kind of talked about it a little bit yesterday, but I wasn't real clear. Can you clarify to our attorney here? Is the agreement still in place even though our millage has passed, or I wasn't sure on the.
Well, yeah, the agreement consists really of three parts. There is a joint resolution that the city and township passed, I think maybe back in 1990. And then there is also we have equally, actually, we each have the same ordinance that regulates actually our participation in the fire commission. So the city has an identical version of our ordinance. And what happened, in my opinion, was that the financing article, and I think it's Article 10 of our ordinance, which described the financing proportions or the mechanism before we actually came up with different millage options, and when we couldn't agree to carry on with the same sort of financing plan that we had before. My opinion is that section of the ordinance, at least, and there are other sections that may need to be amended too, that needs to be changed. And so even though this ordinance is Grand Blanc Townships, if we're going to move forward in the future, we're going to have some agreement as to how that works. If we can't, though, that joint resolution that exists is really the thing that recognizes our cooperation in the fire commission. So there could be a situation where that ordinance is repealed or amended, and we're still operating a joint fire commission under that resolution. So I guess what happens as far as the ordinances are concerned, and also the resolution, remains to be seen. But we know for sure that ordinance on the city side and the township side needs to be amended, at least as far as the funding is concerned.
Is there an expiration to that ordinance, Mr. Laddie?
There
or-
is not an expiration to the ordinance. Now, if either the city or the township chose to repeal that ordinance, we are free to do that at any time. The resolution, though, spells out a process where you have to give notice, 90 days notice to the other party, and then you have to publish that once in the paper.
For the public that's watching this meeting, I'd like to just kind of recap what the allocation study will actually do for us. On our meeting last night, for the public and the media that's here, the board voted in favor of a proposal that Mr. Limita has presented to our board to put together an allocation study of what the, well, Mr. Limita or Mr. Laddie, I want
Mr.
you
Limita
to
is-
explain,
I'll defer to Mr. Limita.
yeah, and maybe the analogy of, that you used earlier to describe it would be helpful for the public as well.
Sure, the cost of service study or cost allocation study we reached out to a company 60 miles up the road, Bay City, Saginaw area, called MGT Consulting Company. They've done a lot of this work all over, and we happen to have a local office with it close to us, so it makes it kind of helpful. And it's for fire suppression services. And what I asked them to do is do a completely independent study to determine the cost of providing fire suppression service and other fire-related services to the township and the city, and to determine what those costs should be allocated at. So if you think of a fixed cost being the fixed cost of having fire service available 24/7, 365 days a year for our needs, and then they will come up with also a variable cost for what it costs to go out and go on a run, and so that you can come up with a very clear cost allocation that will narrow it down to be exactly who should be paying for what. And I think you have to think of it as a ready-to-serve charge, basically. You know, if we only paid what we used for fire, most of us would never pay anything for fire. Some of us would pay a great deal for fire. So it's one of those things we provide as a government. And that ready-to-serve charge, knowing that we have these guys here 24/7, 365, comes with some costs. And so they'll come in and they'll interview both us, the city, the fire department. They'll look at our DPWs. They really go into an in-depth study, and they determine what is the true cost from a labor standpoint, from lawyer, legal fees, water charges, how much does it cost to have hydrants available, the vehicles, the capital equipment, and then labor within administration. What does it cost us to run payroll? What does it cost us to manage benefits? What does it cost us to do all those ancillary things that come with having fire service? So it really is in depth, and when they put it all together and present it, and in addition to that, they also go out and they look to see if there's other cost recoveries that could lower the cost to taxpayers, like maybe cost recovery from insurance companies after somebody's gone on a run. I mean, they really truly examine every aspect of fire service. Then we pick like communities and ask them to compare the cost of our services compared to these like communities that are similar in size or similar in design, that they operate, maybe a full and a paid-on-call department. And I mean, they'll provide them for us, but we can choose our own, which is what I would recommend. And then they come back and they'll give you a study, the thing back that says, here's what it's costing you right now. Here's some alternatives that could potentially lower those costs, or that we think you should consider. Here's what other neighboring communities are doing, that in a comparative analysis to what we're spending, to see if we're being cost effective with our taxpayers' money. And then bottom line is, at the end, there's going to be a cost allocation. There's going to be a fixed charge for the city, a fixed charge for the township, and then that variable cost that could change based on the number of runs or the activity, so as population shifts. But then that's your fact-based starting point for your new agreement on moving forward, and whether that remains as the agreement we have, or maybe it turns to that the city just purchases services from us, or they go their own way and purchase service from someone else or start theirs. But for what it does give us is a true fact-based answer. What does it cost to operate this fire department? What's it going to cost us in the future? How much does it cost to afford these vehicles? What capital needs should you have sitting there? And those are the things you guys need to make those decisions. And we know 1 mil isn't enough. I mean, we've known that from 10 years of experience. 1 mil isn't enough because we can't afford to put aside the $400,000 a year for capital. So I think it's going to be an eye-opener for all of us. And I think that the taxpayers can certainly rest assured that with this information, you guys can make decisions that are allocating costs appropriately, and you just have to be prepared to live with them. I don't know how it's going to come out.
So this allocation of cost is the allocation of cost between the city and the township. We know what the cost is for running the fire department.
We know how much it costs to run the fire department right now, but we don't know how to allocate that fairly. Is it everybody pays 1.5 mils? Is that fair? Might be. I don't know what the results are going to be. It may be, but when you start to think about that fixed cost, and that's something that we've ignored, and with everything else you have a ready-to-serve charge. You think about the water. If you're hooked up to municipal water, you have a ready-to-serve charge to have that water. Your cable television, you have a ready-to-serve charge.
Whether you use it or not.
Most things you have like that. You don't just pay for what you use, and that's going to be part of it. our actual cost may go up a little bit once we realize what the actual true cost is of water, fire hydrants, and what we're gonna owe to our respective DPWs. Because there's certainly a cost there that the fire commission or fire department should be repaying the DPW for sizing to meet, fire demand. And maybe that leads to a whole look at other alternatives. But I think we just have to be prepared for the results. I've been through one of these before. And then we have to act on it once we get it. And that's the commitment from the board, is to act on it once you get the information.
So one of the arguments I'm hearing out there from a few people is that, well, the city only, comprises 15% of the population, so we should only pay 15% of the bill.
So
That,
that's basically how we were set up. If you look back through all the information going back to when this was first formed as a full and paid on call department, started out kind of as an 80-20 split. Here we're gonna do 80-20, and we'll just maintain that because that seems fair based upon SEV, based upon run volume, based upon population. It all roughly comes out to around 80-20. But when we added up the true cost, when we were handling, we took everybody on as the employer of record, and we were handling payroll and managing benefits and administrative services. None of that was getting billed back. We negotiated contracts for the first time when they became unionized, and we paid the bills for the labor attorneys, and that didn't get billed back to the fire commission. So really, when you look at that, there was a lot of costs that were being pushed aside that weren't being considered. And so starting off and saying, hey, it's 80-20, it's the SEV, all that works, that's great, but as long as you're allocating the true cost and what this really looks at. And I think, if you were running a rate model for water, you wouldn't do it like what percentage someone's using. I mean, if you're gonna do this, well, they're only using this much, we'll charge them that. You wouldn't do that. We provide water to some areas in Holly Township. We don't say, well, they're only 3%, so they only have to pay 3% of what it costs us to provide water. We do a rate study and we determine what's the ready to serve charge, and then we provide that, and then they have use charges on top of that. This is no different. This is gonna provide that information. So I think it's so invaluable. It's very comprehensive. It's a lot of hard work. But I think when you actually see it, you realize that it's just like building a rate model for your DPW to determine water and sewer fees, basically.
right. Mr. Thomas?
One of the things that we really have to realize and keep in our minds is that we're two different communities. We're apples and we're oranges. The city and the township, we're two different communities. We can't look at this as one great big happy family, because for lack of better terms, right now it's not, but it's their cost of goods and cost of services is so much different than ours. Like our superintendent reminded us, we pay the legal fees, we pay the attorney fees, we do the extra things that doesn't go back. That's because we're a Grand Blanc Township. So when the city paid last year $203,000 for their fire service, and we paid $1.2471 million for fire service. Granted, we all paid the or a $500,000. It's still, our township residents were paying more because they were paying more. It's two different communities. We can't look at it as one team. And one thing that this was before, well, Mr. Atkinson and myself and the other two trustees were on the board, that it was kind of eye-opening when you gave us our history lesson yesterday, that this all started out when the mayor and their city manager came to our superintendent and said that they were paying too much for fire. And then they weren't allocating enough funds to maintain their privately owned fire department, and was charging a $6,000 kitchen to the fire commission that we're paying 86.5%. 86.5%, our residents were paying 86.5% to put a $6,000 kitchen into a firehouse that they own. And Mr. Supervisor, when you were on this seat, and how much did you folks authorize to pay for the training tower that we paid 100% for? Wasn't that $75,000?
Wasn't it more than that?
was $76,000.
Oh, is it 76,000?
Okay, that was close. $76,000 that we paid 100% for. So it's two different communities. And it's time that our residents are taken care of first.
And granted, there's some economy of scale. I mean, we do have a much bigger scale, so we can spread the cost out for our DPW amongst more residents. We can spread out the cost of fire across more residents. There's some economy of scales when you have various departments, police, we have more residents, so it's cheaper per resident to provide that service. But when you have a smaller community, if you want all those services and departments, it's going to cost you more per resident to have all those services available than it would for a larger community.
Absolutely.
And that's why a lot of smaller communities don't have, you know, a lot of
24 hours.
services. So, so the study will be very interesting. I just want to make sure our public was aware that we know the cost of running the fire department. This is how we're going to allocate or suggest allocating between the city and the township, what those costs are. Mr. Limita?
And so the good news is out of doing this, is that really the way they approach this study is that they're looking for what the optimal revenue is. They're not taking something and backing in or looking for a number. They put everything together and say, what does it really cost to run a department? And then they come back and they tell you what revenues are needed to run that department. They're not saying, oh, let's start with 1.5 mils and see if that works. They're going to come back to you and they're going to say, this is how much it costs to run that department. Here's a fair allocation if you're going to provide services here and here. And you know, that's one piece of good news. The other one is that you just get a realistic assessment of that, and you're also looking at those peer funding arrangements. So we get a chance to benchmark, compare ourselves to like organizations. So that are they doing something different than we are? That there will be some cost savings. So that's again a way to be able to show taxpayers in the entire community, not just township, but the entire community that, and you know, that we've looked at it seriously, and there is some economy of scale. Intergovernmental cooperative agreements exist because there is an economy of scale. We can save money. You're not duplicating different trucks or whatever, and so I would think that it really lowers costs for the entire community, both city residents and township residents, by doing this, if we partner. But I don't know how it's going to come out, and I don't know how the city's going to react. I do know that you're going to have some facts to base your decisions on. I also know that the city has been very vocal in the last 2 months that this is exactly what they're looking for. They want a cost allocation study to show that they pay their fair share. And so I think that's great news. I think that we can put this thing to rest once and for all. We're going to know the true facts, we're going to know the costs, and we're going to allocate them accordingly.
So, Mr. Limita, I take it that Mr. Laddie will be sending a letter to the attorney for the city communicating that we would like to conduct the study with their cooperation?
I will, and I think what'll happen is probably we'll get something somewhat official from the company that Mr. Limita just described, and I'll forward that on to Mr. Griffin and invite them to participate in an equal cost basis to engage in that study.
Okay. And we're prepared to move forward even if they don't, but Ms. Lane?
Last night, if I recall, Superintendent Limita, we authorized up to $40,000 for this contract. You were indicating you might need to bring a budget amendment tonight, and if so, do you want us to do it tonight or some other time?
So you're still going to have to do it because before I can execute the agreement and move forward and we expend any cash, we got to know where it's coming from. I'm in the middle of the 2019 budget process now. I did review accounts to look to see where we're going to come up with $40,000 at. I can't give you that answer right now, just to be honest with you. This was an unbudgeted item. We didn't have $40,000 planned for it. We didn't anticipate we were going into here. So I think if the board has some ideas on where they would like those funds to come from, that would be helpful. Otherwise, as we move through, there are some positions that were budgeted for this year out of the general fund that haven't been filled. So as we move through, I know that that's one possibility, that it would come from less, wages and salaries that were budgeted and that we weren't able to fill those positions. But I don't have a definitive answer for you.
Will that slow us down on moving forward with the?
Absolutely not. We'll work it through and we'll have it before we have to cut the first check to move forward with
Okay.
this.
All right. Okay. Any
Or we
other?
can send it to the fire commission and Bob can pay for it and then I don't have to worry about it anymore. I just move the problem off of my shoulders onto Bob's. And
One of the things that you had mentioned recently, Mina, is that we're being fiscally responsible with our taxpayer dollars by doing this, because number one, it's going to give us a good comparison, like you said, for being able to compare ourselves to other departments, I imagine, that have invested this kind of money to look at, are we efficiently, running things, our cost of delivery of service, but then also, it's with the water model, if another municipality wants to use our service, we know what that would cost them. Fire, we have no idea if somebody, wants to use our fire service, what we would ever charge them. I guess we'd just pull a number out of our hat, but.
it's a good analogy, Mr. Supervisor. You think about water service. We're in negotiations with Holly Township for an expansion for a certain commercial business. And, we have to have a conversation like, what's the buy-in? Because they have to buy in. They have to buy into our infrastructure that already exists. So we don't just say, well, we'll run a water line and start pumping your water and you hook up. They've got to pay those capital fees. They have to pay a buy-in to get involved in there. Most places do this on those municipal rate studies. That's pretty common. Anyone who shares, any communities who share municipal water or sewer, this is a very common in the industry and certainly all across the country, where companies like the one here that has a proposal, this is what they do. We had a joint water agreement between a city and township, my last employer, and we had did the same thing. Every 3 years they would come through and they'd rerun that rate model just to make sure that our capital is still there. Because the biggest thing is we're not funding it for today and what's happening. We know how much it costs to run a fire department right now today, but we have to know how much it's going to cost us tomorrow too. And those things have to be factored in there. And so it's not just about what it costs to operate it, but what's it cost to maintain it? What does it cost to be prepared to meet the future? And all of those things get answered, and you do have to relook at it once in a while. If we run this and we move forward with a joint operation, probably sometime in that agreement, and David could certainly work that out, is that we take it and we look at it every 5 years, or we prescribe when it's going to be looked at, and you have somebody come in and rerun the study and take a look and make sure that we're still fairly allocating costs. So that, like I said, the biggest thing for taxpayers is to know that they are paying fairly and that we've done everything to make sure that we've kept the costs as low as we can while providing the exceptional service that the guys out of Grand Blanc Fire provide day in and day out.
Well, and once again, we want to thank our residents for the vote. It came in very strong at 72%, 71%, which is a mandate that they want good fire service, and we're going to do everything in our power to make sure that money is well spent and that the costs are allocated fairly between the city and the township. And that means that the city doesn't want to work with us and go their own way, they have that option as well. So, Mr. Atkins?
We sit on this side, and I understand the information that's being relayed and we're talking about, but it is a little it is a little murky, and I'll tell you why. I'm hearing mixed messages, and the public will hear the same because they're not privy to some of the information discussions we've had. And where it gets murky at is, and Supervisor Bennett has mentioned, we're talking about a study, and we keep hearing from some people on the board here that we're going to study and we're going to collect costs. I mean, at the end of the day, the only thing that matters to me about the study, and I believe the taxpayers at this point, is the city paying their share, and how do we get that in line, or how do we cut that off? And, we sit here and try and make it sound a little better or a little softer than what it is, but we're also sending out the message as though, hey, we got the mill, now we're going to go back and look at how much it costs to run it. That is not the message, but I'm hearing a little bit of that murkiness, and we need to make sure that, that the study, I know it's going to help with optimization and look at all the opportunities to run more efficiently, but that's not the message that everybody, that's not the same song sheet everybody is hearing, so.
That's why I want to make sure people know, we know what it costs to run the fire department.
Can I add a comment?
Yeah,
to that?
Mr. Laddie.
We know because we've been operating it very well for the last few years. But what we didn't know back then, when we went from a paid-on-call department, was how our projections were gonna turn out. And we didn't do an in-depth study of all of the true costs of operating a full-time department, nor had we done that for the part-time department. In fact, we had a funding mechanism that was just 80-20 for a while. Before that, it was 75-25. When we got together and tried to jumpstart or launch the full-time department, we were literally a bunch of lay people trying to make really good faith estimates on what we thought it was gonna cost. When we did that, we didn't factor in the fact that the firefighters, and it's completely their right to do this, would unionize. We didn't take into account the cost of labor negotiations. We certainly didn't delve into the cost of the burden on infrastructure, the administrative burden on when we were required, when the township was essentially required to become the employer, we didn't account for the administrative costs of that. Again, in part because really we weren't experts at it. And I think what we're gonna see in this situation is we're gonna have experts take a look at, and in hindsight, by the way, we missed the mark, right? Both parties agree that we don't have proper funding for capital equipment. As good intentioned as all those efforts were, we got it wrong. We don't wanna get it wrong again. And so that's one thing I think experts will be able to tell us is exactly what we'll need in the future. That's what we couldn't do back then. The other thing is, and there has been contention about who should pay what. And that's understandable when you went from 75-25, 80-20, everyone pays a mill, but then the cost exceeded that funding formula. So it'll be interesting for everybody's standpoint, I think, when we have experts come in and tell us in great detail what things cost and who they're costing. Those administrative costs I just mentioned are costing us. There's a price tag for that. So I know that, I understand exactly the idea that this is not something that we need to do necessarily, because again, we know how to operate a really good fire department. It's just we need to get the financing proportions right and the projected future amounts right. And we didn't, and with all, I mean, I admit everyone was good intentioned and tried really hard, but we weren't experts, and we didn't get it right.
And this was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
That was worded very good, thank you.
And you didn't predict the downturn of the economy to,
First depression.
Correct.
So we'll move onward and we'll make some progress. So with that, we'll move to, I don't know if anybody's heard anything in the community that we haven't discussed already. I think the fire has been the biggest thing in the community. We do have, coming up in September, our Ally Challenge, and that's moving along well. Yes, Mr. Atkins?
Maybe should have asked last night, but is there any updates on DDA or anything else to share with?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I'm about to distribute a draft of an ordinance that will create a DDA board and get the ball rolling. So look for that probably in the next week or so. I think you want to probably maybe take that up at your September meetings, because I think we've got a pretty full plate in August. But and as I recall, I think we might be. Are we past the 60 days? Tuesday. So we're very close to the 60-day period of time.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Thomas?
everybody have a very safe Back to the Bricks week, starting Monday to kick off. And Mr. Bennett will be involved in some of the activities, I know, on Wednesday and Monday morning at 5:30 in the morning. Look for him on Channel 12. Be safe. Please don't burn out on Saginaw Street. I know that our police force will be out. Unless you don't see them. Oh, no, I didn't see them.
All right, so I think we went through our reports last night. I don't know, Mr. Laddie or Mr. Lima, do you have anything for tonight?
Sure.
Only thing I have to add is that next week I will be on vacation all week up in the UP, but we'll
Turn
have my-
back to the breaks.
I will have my phone handy and be available at any time when there is cell service.
Okay,
I'd like to make a motion that we adjourn.
Support.
okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? I also have these decals here. I don't know, did everybody get one? They're kind of, our planning director
Oh, awesome.
did those, but for your back window. Did you get one, Kathy?
I'll take another one.